Okay, so last week we started studying Tanya. We started chapter 1, and we got introduced to our spiritual anatomy. We have two souls, and our first soul is we talked about it as being the natural soul, the vital soul. Later it's going to be called the animal soul. Why is it called the animal soul? Because it's what animals and humans have in common. It animates. It's what babies are given at birth. It's that animating life, and it also looks to be alive. That's what its job is, to survive. It can be associated with the brainstem, the reptilian brain, that survival brain. That's what all living things, animals and humans both share in common. So we call it the animal soul. Now, so chapter 1 was all about that. Now chapter 2 is going to introduce us to our godly soul. But before we talk about the godly soul, I'd like to introduce you to another soul that's lesser known, but nevertheless, it is important to understand it. It's the intellectual soul, Nefesh HaSichlit. Have you heard of Nefesh HaSichlit?
Nefesh
Sichlit.
Sechel.
Yes. Come from the word of sechel. Sechel means mind. It's the intellectual soul. And this is the human soul. This is what makes humans different from animals. Whereas animals are purely instinctive, so that animal soul is also can be called an instinctive soul. They don't make they don't have to do higher order thinking. They don't make conscious choices. They act on instincts, and it's not bad. It's not immoral. It's amoral, right? It's just is. It's natural. Human beings, in addition to having an animal quality, we also have a human quality, and that's our ability to reason and to think and to make choices. So all humans have this Nefesh HaSichlit. And in the future, a little spoiler alert, this intellectual soul is going to be important in helping communicate between the animal soul and the godly soul that we'll now learn about. So, let's start with reading the first sentence of the text in chapter 2. I'll ask Rika, maybe, can you read that first in Hebrew, and then we'll go on with the English? Right here. That's right. Okay, so reading that in English, Katya, just that bold.
The second uniquely Jewish soul is truly a part of God above.
Yes, exactly. So, that is how we introduce our second soul. Notice it's called the second soul. Why do you think it's called the second soul? It's chronological. The first soul is what we get first, right? We receive it first at birth. The second soul enters our bodies after the animating natural soul. You might say, if the godly soul were to enter first, we wouldn't stand a chance. There would be no challenge. It would just completely take over our existence, and that would be we would only have a perception of godliness. So in order to give us a challenge, God first gave us this animating soul that is drive to be selfish, to be, not in a bad way, just selfish, to exist, to be important, to take up space, to survive. And only after that do we get a little bit of our godly soul, our second soul. And this soul, where does it come from? You just read?
A part of God.
It is a part of God. So this is the special Jewish soul that we talk about. The human soul, all humans have, the intellectual soul. The ability to make reason, the ability to make choices, the ability to be a good person, right? That is our human soul. Our godly soul is our Jewish soul. It's an additional soul. And it comes from God himself.
So the non-Jewish people do not have that soul?
Correct. They do have a human soul, and they can be humanly good people and make good moral choices. That's what the human soul gives us. Mm-hmm. But the godly soul is not about morality. It's about transcendence. So let's put this into practical terms. A human soul can cause us to be kind and generous and giving. The godly soul is that quality that allows us to do it completely without calculations, without any possibility of self-benefit, no appreciation, no recognition even. It doesn't even need that. It's completely altruistic. Why would it be doing something? It's just to connect with God, to connect with godliness. So from the godly soul's perspective, there is nothing else besides God. It's what's the word? It doesn't want to exist on itself. It wants to just, it's like a flame of a candle that wants to just, if you put it up to the sun, there's no flame. It's just light. That's what it wants. It wants to be completely consumed and overwhelmed by, it wants to go back to its source, to God. It doesn't want to have a separate existence, which is a direct conflict with the animal soul, who all it wants is to be important, is to be seen, is to exist, is to take up space. That's what it's like to be, a physical creation. But we have this conflict within us, one that wants to exist and be important, the other one that doesn't want to exist, it doesn't want to be important, it just wants God. It wants to, so to speak, be see-through. So that godly soul is what gives the rest. But if it was all about the godly soul, then we wouldn't be alive today. So obviously, there's a point in this conflict and that we're kind of forced with. It's like you're being stuck in a room with somebody and you say, work it out. That's what is happening to us on this earth, is that we're being told, work it out, because there's a point. Without the animal soul, this is like a spoiler alert, way. Without the animal soul, we wouldn't be able to accomplish. And look at the mitzvot of the Torah. Look at the commandments. Honor your father and mother. A godly, energetic soul isn't having a father or a mother to honor. The food we eat, the blessings we say before we eat the food, right? A godly soul without a body doesn't need food. So there's obviously a reason why the godly soul needs the animal soul. So making a case for the godly soul, you think, well, why do we even have an animal soul? We do. We have an animal soul for a very important reason. But understanding the godly soul on its own, it's like, whoa, to give into the needs of the animal soul, it is contrary to its existence. To magnify the conflict. The animal soul, if you give into the godly soul, it's like, wait a minute, I'm not being seen here. I'm not getting my needs met. All you want to do is transcend. And the transcendent soul, the godly soul, is like, if you do get all physical, I'm not getting my needs met. That's all about the godly soul. Now let's talk about where it comes from. It comes from God. But it doesn't only say in the text, Chelek Eloka mima'al, a piece of God. It says mamash, literally. And the reason why it says mamash is because it's not like, oh, it comes from God. It is God inside of us. And the Tanya is going to now give us two different examples of how to try to understand this idea of a piece of God within us and to explain just how essential our soul, just how much of God's essence is in our soul. So the first example is, have you ever heard of the Jewish people being called God's children? Mm-hmm. So that's quite literal. And the example is given of the way of a child is, I'm sorry, getting distracted.
Trying to get you guys all focused.
I know, right? The soul of, I'm sorry, I really am getting distracted.
I'm done.
Thank you. I appreciate the picture. And I am nervous from the recording, just so you know. I'm going to have to edit out all these stuff. So, the soul of the... okay, so we're talking about us being Hashem's children. So, a human being, what is its source? Its source is the genetic makeup of its parents. Where does the genetic makeup of its parents come from? According to ancient medicine, it comes from the brain. But actually, I venture to say in even today's medicine, we all know that our pituitary gland is in our brain, where all the hormones come from. So it all originates in the brain. So for argument's purposes, let's see it that way. And the example is of a child, that every part of its body, even its toenail, is really, in essence, if you can trace it back to the genetic makeup, which can be traced back to the father and mother's brain. So that is an example for us being part of God's, so to speak, brain. He doesn't have a brain, so it's his supernal wisdom. This is getting very Kabbalistic. And then the Tanya goes on to say, so hold it, I'll explain it again in a minute and put it all together. So, and then the Tanya goes on to say that God's wisdom is himself, because God is not like, here it is, I was looking for it. So it said, I would like to read it in the text. Maybe somebody can pass me your, yeah, there we go. I just want to show you exactly which text it is. So God's brain and his wisdom, and let's talk about ours. We have a brain. It has the capacity to think, and it thinks about thoughts, right? We are taught in psychology, we are not our thoughts. Mm-hmm. We think thoughts. And it's actually important and helpful to make that distinction between us and our thoughts. We don't want to let our thoughts define us. But with Hashem, it is not that way. Hashem is not human. Hashem is one with his thoughts. His knowledge, his ability to think, and his thoughts, all of that is one. And if you just allow yourself to think about the abstractness of God, it really cannot be any other way. He is one. He's not divided into different parts. So he is. His thoughts, his wisdom, the supernal wisdom is God. It's not a part of God, it's God. So we can read that in the text in the top of the page of, it's a kind of upside down. I think it's the third page. The top of the page where it says, for he is wise. So, Shelley, are you able to read that for us?
I will, if I can
Thank
find
you.
it.
It's the top of the page, right here.
Okay. For he is wise. God possesses the quality of wisdom, but not with a wisdom that is known to us created beings, because he and his wisdom are one.
That's right. So why is that important in our context? Because we're talking about us being like descending and emanating from God's wisdom, which is God. And the other example that the Tanya gives us to explain this, and I think both of these examples are going to complement each other. The other example is, okay, so how did Hashem create the world? Let's go back to our basic knowledge of Bereshit, the first, when we start the Torah. Bereshit, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. How did he create heaven and earth? What did he do? He spoke things. He spoke. And we are taught that he spoke 10 utterances. And from those 10 sentences, the world came into existence. He spoke, and it was. And actually, there's a whole book of Tanya, the third book of Tanya, is dedicated to philosophizing about this and the existence of the earth and how it relates to Hashem's 10 utterances. For our purposes, let's talk about the idea of speech, creating. And let's contrast that with humans. How did God create Adam, the first man? He formed his body, right? And then what did he do for his soul? He blew. Yes, it says in, thanks, Rika. So that's the other thing I want to read inside. I'm going to need to borrow that just to show you where it is again. Okay. He blew. What is the difference between speaking and blowing?
Can I say
Yeah, please.
that when you blew, you actually like put part of you inside inside the person that you're trying to.
Yes. So when you speak, you can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and maybe take a sip of water and you're fine. You know, you might get tired after a long, long, long time, but you're fine. But how many balloons can you blow before you start getting tired? So this idea of Hashem blowing now Hashem does not have a mouth, and he wasn't blowing a balloon into Adam's soul. Why does the Torah tells us he blew?
The energy transfer?
Exactly. Hashem wants us to know that the energy transfer from himself to Adam's soul was from from deep, deep, deep inside of him. That's why he used blow. To show that this soul is coming from the kishkis, from deep, deep, deep inside of Hashem, and we have that in us. And actually, if you look at the word neshama comes from the word of neshima. Linshom means to breathe. Neshima is a breath. Neshama is the soul that God breathed into us. So, I'm still trying to find this text. Okay, I found it. So it's the second page. And even the first page. Actually, let's go all the way to the first page. It says, maybe Adina, you can read it in Hebrew, from כמו שכתוב.
וכמו שכתוב בזוהר, מאן דנפח מתוכי הנפח, פירוש מתוכיותו ומפנימיותו.
Thank you. Wendy, from the second paragraph here, you can read it to us, the text in English. You got it right there.
This one.
There we go.
As it is written concerning Adam, whose soul was a comprehensive one, a neshama klalit, in that it contained all the particular souls of subsequent generations. And he blew into his nostrils a soul of life. And as we say in prayer concerning the soul of every individual Jew, you blew it into me. The significance of the verb to blow as it relates to the infusion of the Jewish soul is now explained.
Thank you. So, we know we have two souls. Well, three, but we have two main souls with that intellectual soul going between them. So we have this natural, instinctive soul that wants to exist and survive, and we have this transcendent, godly soul that wants to transcend. It's completely altruistic. And they want opposite things. The godly soul all it wants to do is God's mission. It needs the animal soul to do that, but the animal soul needs to be channeled, and it's difficult because it wants to exist, right? So, the godly soul is just a little bit more about it. That's the soul that allows us whenever we feel a transcendent moment. It also is the soul that was woken up, let's say, in events like October 7th. It's the soul that throughout history has caused our people to agree to lose their life and not give up their identity as a Jewish person. That's to die for the cause. Exactly. That's from the godly soul, to transcend. That's what it does. And we have 5 levels of our neshama. And they come into, like I said, nefesh hasheni, the second soul. They embody throughout our life at different times in different stages. And some of the levels of our neshama are like seasonal. Like, for example, Yom Kippur, we get our 5th level of our neshama. Our deepest part becomes alive and like shows itself. That's the same part of our soul that gets awakened in times of crisis, especially when it's tested, like, Jew or die. that Yom Kippur spark. It's called a Yechidah. It's one with, right, it's Yechidah, one with Hashem. So that's, I would say, the part of us that was awakened in October 7th. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is not just because of that awakening, but also because the another aspect of our soul is that it's collective. Think about it. If our soul is a part of God, and your soul is a part of God, and all the Jewish souls are part of God, then we're all connected very essentially, very, very deeply. We're all from the same soul.
This works also for the animal soul.
Not the same way. Because the animal soul is nothing in this earth can be created without, aside from Hashem. That would not be possible. Hashem is responsible for all creation, and that's what we come with the 10 utterances. The animal soul, I think, is more part of the 10 utterances, right? Because God created on the fifth day and the sixth day animals and fish, right? And humans on the sixth day. That's all from the utterances. But this belowing, this deep, deep, deep part of Hashem, that soul, we're all part of that. And so we all come from that same essence. We're all the same. We all have the same exact energy inside of us. And that unifies us. And that is why so many of us couldn't sleep for a month after October 7th, maybe longer. Because it was not possible to separate ourselves from our people. We're one body. And actually, this one body is the next Tanya example. We are one soul. However, Moses' soul, Abraham's soul, those souls are not the same as my soul. The way we experience it here. The source is the same. But throughout, like, how would we all be different if we were all exactly the same soul inside? Now, of course, there's personality and there's the animal soul, and there's that very much makes up our differences. But we actually do have differences from our godly soul as well. We have different missions. Our godly souls each have a different mission, a different flavor. And that is created through the journey of the soul as it comes down to the earth. It is Hashem's essence, but it's kind of like, and the Tanya's example is a perfect one. It's kind of like the gestation period of a child. That first genetic material, sperm, egg, right? That is the source of all that follows, the entire baby. And I was just in New York, and I just got to meet my new niece just at less than a day old in the hospital. It was so special. And every time I meet a baby and hold a new baby, it just boggles my mind, the miracle of birth. And actually, my sister-in-law just had a baby 3 months early. And that to me brought it home in another new way. Like, this is the baby that was we don't usually see babies at this stage. We see them 3 months later. But oh my God, there's a full baby for so long. Right? And then but of course they wanted the baby to stay in as much as possible, because every single day the baby grows and grows and grows and develops further and further and further. That's like our souls. They go through this gestational period, and depending on now we're going to switch the example a little bit from time to like what is meant for that soul. So some, like stem cells. Stem cells can turn into skin cells or heart cells or eye cells or hair cells, right? It can be different things throughout gestation. Exactly. So we all originate from those stem cells, all parts of us. But the fingernail ends up different than a brain cell, even though it all comes from the same stem cell. So that's how it is with our body of Jewish people. We are a body. And some of us come from the finger, and some of us come from the eye, and some of us come from the brain, and some of us come from the gut. And we're all but we're all important. Now, which part of the body feels the pain of the entire body? The heart and the brain. And I would venture to say the brain more than the heart, because the brain allows the heart to feel. Without the brain, the heart wouldn't, right? So the brain, it kind of and actually that is another Tanya thought that we're going to talk about in the next chapters, which is the mind controls the heart. But in science as well, like the brain kind of manifests and sort of leads our heart, our feelings. So I would say the brain feels all the pain of the body. And in our Jewish body, we also have a brain. And that brain is our righteous people, our leaders. And our leaders feel all of us. In fact, there are many, many stories of leaders throughout the generations and this the way that they have felt the people. For example, there's one of the Chabad rabbis, the Rebbe Maharash, who taught that he would receive people in audiences for conversations and guidance, and he would have to change his clothing in between each person who he met with, because he would sweat so through his clothing from his empathy that he was experiencing. He's like, I have to take off my clothes, go into their experience, and come out of their experience, go to my experience to answer them, and then go back. And that was exhausting. So he was feeling their experience so intensely because of his position as a leader. Our leaders throughout the generations have also served to lead us by example. Very different from like an intermediary. An intermediary would be somebody who connects to God for us. That would be idol worship. As Jewish people, we have rejected the notion of human beings serving as an intermediary between us and God because we don't need one. We have a direct relationship with God. So what do our leaders do? If not to be an intermediary, if not to connect us to God?
Guide.
Yes. They show us how to connect to God. They show us how to connect to God from our own soul. We have God right here. So when we watch them connect with God as a brain cell, as a head, who has an easier time accessing that experience than maybe the other parts of the body, we say, oh, I can do the same thing because I've got that.
May I ask, would they then be seen more as a teacher?
Yes. And Moses was our very first leader. That was this, actually Abraham could be too, but Moses in a lot of ways was one of the first leaders. And he was a teacher. He was the ultimate teacher of Torah. That is I would say that is a beautiful description of our leaders. They're teachers. And also the King David, our monarchs that some of them really went off the path, but are good ones, like King David, like King Solomon, they would carry a little Torah with them all the time because their role wasn't just to make decisions, it was really to lead by example. And King David wrote the Tehillim. He was the one that we talked about in the last chapter, who was like the tzaddik that conquered his natural soul and brought it over completely and changed it over as a righteous person, not as a Beinoni, a middle person that we're talking about. But they are, even though the righteous people are not Beinonis like us, we use their extreme ability to connect as an example, because we do have a godly soul within us that is able to connect with God. So, let me see what follows this. Any questions while I go and look?
So at what moment does the godly soul arrive in the body of a baby?
Good question. So birth is not the full embodiment, but of course there's that there's an idea in Kabbalah called makif and panimi. Makif is surrounding, and panimi is internalizing. So at first, the godly soul kind of surrounds, and it internalizes. A level internalizes by a baby boy's bris and by a baby girl's baby naming, and that's why the baby name is very connected to the soul of a person. It's that soul associates with that name. So that's one level of internalization. And another main level is by bar or bat mitzvah. And that is why a child is not held accountable until then. That wouldn't be fair. They don't even have their godly soul. Until then is education and training. And then they get their godly soul and they say, okay, now you can be held accountable. So that's the main stage of internalization. Then there's marriage. Actually is another level of internalization of the male and female aspects of the soul. And throughout our life, like I said, we've got a Yom Kippur experience. There's seasonal aspects of the soul too. There's a Shabbat soul. That's our extra soul we get on Shabbat. That's the level of Chaya. And that's why some of us can feel, if you tune into it, you might feel a little bit sad after Shabbat goes out. It's a very Jewish experience of our soul leaves, and we have the Havdalah and the spices to comfort our soul after it's lost a part of its embodiment until the next Shabbat. We have a holiday soul, similar to the Shabbat soul. And then, of course, that Yom Kippur soul. So we have different aspects of our soul that we appreciate and feel at different times.
Does one need to be conscious and in touch with these landmark occasions, or is it happening subconsciously by attending services, just being there? Like, I've never known these stages before.
It happens.
But I've had the feeling.
It happens no matter what.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah. In fact, I always laugh and say, "Were you?" I always.
Isn't it?
It's 100% true.
Exactly. You didn't have to be conscious. It's there.
100%, and that is reassuring because it's true. I always laugh when people say, like, "Were you bar mitzvahed?" I'm like, what do you mean bar mitzvahed? You turned 13. You got a bar mitzvah by virtue of turning 13. Your soul came into your body.
So it's unconscious.
It's unconscious. It's happening. We can tune into it. And like you said, you didn't know necessarily this language, but you've experienced this. Let's say when you go to the kotel and you feel something. That's our godly soul.
I've got to tell you, even when Noam came and sang, there was an essence of beauty and energy amongst everybody. You didn't have to be Israeli to get it.
I felt it so strong.
Connectivity and passion and love.
Well, there's an
empathy.
example of a leader. That's what leaders do.
Okay.
And leaders don't connect us to them. That's the beauty of what Noam was doing. He was connecting us to each other and to the unifying aspect of all of us. Right? And the unifying to our souls, to our unifying souls. And then we kind of all, I don't know, I felt like lifting it upward to Hashem. Together,
I think a lot
as
of us
one.
feel that, right?
Yeah? That is what we're talking about. That is an example of what a leader can do. And we have two different types of experiences of inspiration. One of them is a very emotional experience, which was like Noam. And another one is a very intellectual. So Noam was going the emotional route, and studying the Tanya and also meditating and contemplating would be the intellectual route. Both are very valid and true experiences. The intellectual route is known to be a little bit more deeply rooted. In other words, it's less exciting, but it affects like slower and steadier change, slower and steadier appreciation, I'd say, of the godly soul within us. And the emotional route is it's very exciting, but it kind of has its experience and then it burns out. Also very important, though, to have those highs to help sustain our mundane daily life, to go back to remember back to refer back to, as like, remember, have that memory inspire us even. So both of them, actually, that's the cover page of the Tanya, which we didn't go into and spend a whole class studying, but I'd love to talk about it now. Talks about the long, short way and the short, long way. And it says in the cover page, I can turn back to it. It says that when I spoke about it last week, and I said that the point of the Tanya is to show that it's close to us, and the continuation of that sentence was to show that the point of this book is to show how it's close to us using a long, short way and a short, long way. what is the long, short way and the short, long way? The example is given of a boy who, it's from the Talmud. It's like an actually written up example. The Talmud talks about a boy who asks the way to Jerusalem. And he comes across, a man who asks the way to Jerusalem, and a smart boy. And the Jerusalemite kids were known to be very smart and like wicked and, what's the word, like pithy. And he said, well, it depends if you want the short, long way or the long, short way.
Precocious.
Yes, precocious, but also like whippersnappers. And the guy says, okay, whatever, take me to the short, long way. He says, yeah, okay, the path, you can see Jerusalem. You see that straight path? Take it. You'll get, short, long way. So he's like, okay, great. Like I see direct. And he goes on the path and he starts out fine, but then he starts to get like thorns. And this is what the Gemara says. Like the Talmud describes this, thorns and obstacles and rocks. And he's going and is so close, but so far. And then he says, okay, so fine. He goes back and says, okay, just take me the long, short way. And the path is windy, and he's like, oh my God, it's such a long path, but clear. So the intellectual way is known as the long, short way. And I use that example a lot in my life, like when I'm setting up a room or whatever, or preparing a class, and I'm like, okay, let's like take a minute. I try to say, okay, let's do this the long, short way, not take any shortcuts that are going to bog us down in the long run. We each have within us a hidden love, which is also a foreshadow to later on in Tanya. We talk about this ahava mesuteret, this hidden love. It's a birthright. It comes along with our soul. And that's what the inspiration of an emotional, inspirational experience awakens. The long, short way is generating that experience, generating that connection and that awareness, which is a lot longer process. But the reason why it ends with short is because it's self-directed. So it's more sustainable. It's more sustaining. You're not dependent on an outside stimuli because you're generating it on your own. It's basically like doing the work. Mm-hmm. Like the psychological work. It's like that. Versus just like
growing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Versus just going to like some, I don't know, mushroom ceremony or whatever, and it's like, whoa, I've got this amazing thing, right? That's the short, long way, and then the long, short way is like, okay, therapy every week, Earning it, exactly. So I'd love to end off with a meditation.
Are we there already?
I know.
Wow.
Went too fast.
I did speak a little fast. I get a little when I'm recorded.
I think you did.
Thank you. I need that. I need that. So for our little meditation, let's ground our feet. Take a little sip of water if you need. Okay. Let's close our eyes. Let's take deep breaths in. And out. In and out. And feel the breath enter and leave. The breath that is the gift of life that Hashem gives us. He wants us to be here. Here we are as a body with two souls, an animating soul and a godly soul. Feel the godly soul. Feel that breath of the godly soul. Feel its transcendent qualities. Feel as it might be lifting you ever so slightly upward. Now imagine searching for connection with Hashem. Imagine yourself looking outward. Where does your mind rest to? Is it a space in the world that maybe you felt this connection? Is it a person that embodies this connection? Is it an experience that you've had? And now feel the common thread between these connections if you've had more than one. Or if you've had one, where is the connection happening? Is it outside of yourself? Or feel your energy go deeper and deeper and deeper inside of your core being. Is that where the connection's happening? Feel your soul. Feel the depth of your soul as being a piece of God. Next time you're searching, take a moment, close your eyes, and search within yourself, because God is inside of me and of you. And the connection is there, always. So now, I'd like you to take a moment, keep breathing in, out, and think about something you can do with this connection. Can be a thought, a mantra throughout your day, such as, God is in me and I am connected. Maybe it's an action, an act of kindness that comes straight from your soul. Maybe it's a prayer, a vocalization of our connection with Hashem, a communication. Maybe it's a choice. Maybe the answer to a dilemma you've been having is becoming clear once you connect with your soul. And now let's keep breathing in and out. And now let's orient ourselves with our surroundings as souls within bodies. As we open our eyes and orient ourselves as pieces of Hashem in the world, here to connect with each other and with the world itself to affect positive change and growth. Thank you for joining me with that. Does anybody want to share? I'm going to stop the recording.